Hello and welcome to Fearless DIY Music. My name is Tristan Lass, and today I'm joined by my dear friend Kevin Gamble, who's actually in town. He's in the studio space with me right now, and we're going to do just a little brief tour and kind of, discuss the way that I set this space up and how it works a little bit. We're not going to be going into excruciating detail, but we'll be just kind of checking things out. And so I'm going to have Kevin just kind of ask me questions, and we'll just go around the room and see how it goes. All right.
Thanks, Tris. Glad to be in your space for a little bit here today, and figured we could start off. One of the main principles behind DIY is making things work for you, not just suffering through the inadequacy of things as they are, but actually tailoring your tools, your space to yourself and the outcomes you want to achieve and the way you want to work. And so I thought maybe if you wanted to start off talking a little bit about the principle behind your space and the obstacles you wanted to remove to productivity, then we'll jump through the different stations here and
Sure.
them out.
Well, what this room kind of has come to represent is a giant compromise. I came from a space that I had in Portland. I was fortunate enough to have a large space where I had 3 different rooms. I had a tracking room, I had a lounge space, as you remember, and I had a control room. So to go from that to a 12 by, what is this? This is like a 12 by 10 room. And that's being generous. Given that I've done soundproofing on the ceiling is dropped a full foot so that things upstairs and things things upstairs don't come through, and things that I'm doing in here don't, end up bleeding too much or getting me a noise ordinance. I'm fortunate enough to be in a basement where I've got concrete on 3 sides of this room, and this side of the room with the door has a laundry room off of it, which is my live room. But this is all kind of separate from the rest of the foundation of the house. So I'm fortunate to kind of have a bunker type space. Now, given that what I'm saying is that I was forced into a space that's much smaller with a lot of limitations. So what my goal with this space was to downsize everything to the point where I could do the things that I do, which are vocals, which are bass guitar, which are guitar, acoustic guitar, drums, all the rock instruments, and a little bit of keyboards, but keyboards you don't necessarily need a space for as much because I don't use amplification with them. I'm just plugging them directly into my interface. When I originally built the space in here, it was a full analog setup from Portland. I had a 16-track mixer. I had a hard drive recorder, Alesis HD24, so I had 24 tracks of digital multi-track, and all the outboard gear you could imagine. I have a shelf up here that was filled with nothing but out rack gear. And now I'm down to a single rack, which is featured in one of my videos about do you still need outboard gear, which I will probably link in the description of this video. Anyway, so to get all of this together, I switched over to using a DAW. I have downsized to using a minimal amount of equipment. As you saw when I was setting up, I flipped 2 or 3 switches and everything's on, both to do video and audio. The stations, as I call them, it's by wall. I have a bass wall, I have my electric guitar wall, I have my acoustic guitar wall. Then I have my control desk here, which extends the length of the room. And I have everything at hand. I can reach everything easily. I have 3 of the same laptops spread out through all of my workspaces, so everything is the same. I use the same operating system, the same software, the same hardware everywhere. I have, identical, USB interfaces. And so the idea is that I want to be able to walk in here and I want to be able to, at the heaviest lift I want is to have to set up a couple mic stands and get my mics plugged in and set my levels. And that's really it. If I have to do more than that, then I rethink how I have things set up and I move them so that they're in a place where I'm not stretching cables or having to use patch bays. I have no patch bay, I have no nothing. My signal chains are, and I have a video about signal chains, and there's a reason for that. I don't have big signal chains anywhere. Everything is hardwired 24/7 with 1 or 2 connections needing to be made. Otherwise, I won't do stuff. It's too much. It's too much work. You know, you're when we do our shows together and you're setting up, you're like, okay, I've got to get all my stuff set up. And for me, it's just like, I just come down and I flip two switches and I'm like, because I understand your space is different from my space and everybody's working within limitations. So I went from having unlimited possibilities, which was a huge spaghetti mess, to being very streamlined here, but in a much more restricted space. But I found that having fewer options has made it better.
Yes, yeah, that's a great point, and a great principle in general is, tying back to what you said earlier. It's very common these days. A lot of people are promoting information, selling information, like you can only do this if you have X in place. If your room is set up this exact way, if you have this standard of equipment or setup or isolation or various kinds of things. And that can really be, we talk a lot about kind of rabbit holes. That can be a rabbit hole of distraction. And so the principle here, it sounds like, is starting with, what do I want to accomplish? What do I have available to work with? How do I want to work within that space? And what is the outcome I want to achieve? And so everything you just described is kind of turning that equation around, where it's not, okay, I have to meet this specific standard that these people tell me is what you need in order to do this. It rotates it around and puts the power back in your hands, where you say, okay, this is the outcome I want. These are the variables I have available. How do I make this into that? And the goal being, as you said, to just knock those obstacles out of the way, to where you know what you want to do, you know how you best can accomplish that. How do I clear all of those paths out of the way, reduce the number of variables to the minimum, so that your connection to the idea and what you want to execute is as straight line as possible.
Yeah, that's exactly it. And it's, I went through a lot of, it was painful to get rid of a lot of my outboard gear, but I realized that, I picked the most utilitarian of the pieces. I picked a utilitarian tube mic preamp. It is my only mic preamp. I have one tube stereo compressor. It is my only stereo compressor that's vacuum tube based. I was just very strategic about it. I mean, I think that too often what I'm going for at this point, and I think that where some of my worst recording experiences ever came from, was having too many things in the way of the sound that was being produced. And then all of a sudden you're chasing, like you said, you're chasing all these variables, or you're like, oh, well, if I get this piece of gear, that'll correct what that piece of gear screwed up. And to me now I'm more about, what sound can I get out of these speakers in here and capture it in a microphone and put it straight into there. That's what I want. And get the sound right the first time, put it in, and then not have to do post-production work, because post-production work does not fix problems. It creates more problems. And then you start to hate your mix, and then you hate the song, and then you're like, why didn't I just take 5 extra minutes and just play the damn thing again, or something like that? So I'm not a Luddite, because I am using, digital technology. I've been educating myself on, using a DAW and how to maximize all of these connections to get the smoothest, cleanest signal chain with low latency and everything like that. I get all the technical stuff. And the thing that also inspires me is there's a lot of bedroom recorders who have not even as much gear as I do, and they're just using USB microphones, and they're getting great results doing those sorts of things. And so I don't think that when we're seeing people who have walls of equipment around them, or that, I'm not going to call him out, but, somebody's sitting basically in a captain's chair surrounded by dumble amps, or whatever. You don't need that, and you don't need to spend the money. And I'm also really, really budget conscious. I try to repurpose, and I also try to find the best value always for anything that I buy.
Yeah, and it can be very easy to go the other way. These days you're just a click away from a whole additional suite of plugins, which all have individual learning curves. One click away from that discounted piece of new equipment that will supposedly get you exactly where you need to be. But kind of turning that around and flexing that muscle of, I'm making a quality choice about this aspect of my system, and I'm putting that choice into action, and I'm moving on, and I'm focusing my executive function, my decision-making function, my creative energies on the actual work itself, and the workflow that makes sense. And so it really is a decision, a conscious decision.
It has to be.
It has to be, because the easy available alternative is unlimited options, unlimited decisions. There's always an avalanche of free plugins, free software that can 6 months later you finally learned how to use it, and you're still back at square one in terms of actually executing your workflow and building out a space that gets out of your way. And so there's a middle ground. You have to go through some learning curves to put these things in place, but once you do, it's a decision to not then second guess indefinitely.
Yeah, well, option paralysis is real, and I think that the software universe has just made that nearly impossible. Or just using the same default sounds in a box that everybody else uses too, which is equal. And that's there's the insane way where option paralysis drives you crazy, and you try everything to do something, and then there's also the lazy way, which is just like, well, this is what everybody uses. It sounds great right out of the box, but there is that middle ground, like I said. I just want to try to get a good sound out of these things behind me and just get that sound in there as clean as I can so that I have a good mixing experience. And the performance is the number one thing. Play it right, play it in time, and have some feel to it as well, have the right vibe to whatever it is that you're recording.
Yeah.
Well, I think that kind of covers the basic philosophy of what's happening in this tiny room. So now, if you want, I think that we're going to have Kevin just kind of go from wall to wall and ask me questions maybe about how do I record, these particular, components of a track, when I'm making a song.
Yeah. In this one room with just a few switches to flip to get started, we've got bass guitar, electric guitar, a full drum kit, a wall of acoustic instruments. We've got synthesizers. And so that is what you can accomplish when you go through the process that Tris talked about earlier. So let's get started and go through these stations. So starting on this short wall.
Let me get in. Okay. Make sure I'm on camera.
Okay. So starting off on this little wall here, we've got a couple of reliable bass guitars and a bass setup. So Tris, talk a little bit about how you function from a bass standpoint. I see it looks like you've got a amplified amp available. You've got DI capability. How does this work in your workflow?
Well, first we should mention that both those basses are yours.
Oh, okay.
Well, no. I've got a 76P bass, and then we got it's 1980, right? The BB800, yes. 1980 BB800 Yamaha, which is basically a P bass. I use that bass for smoother, more balanced response for a track. If I'm doing something that really needs to have a lighter touch and a more even recording experience, I will use that bass. But I primarily use the 76. It has a lot of character. It is wild. You have to really know the neck and know, it doesn't have any dead spots or anything like that, but it definitely has places where, it really barks. And so it's perhaps the best sounding bass I've ever heard recorded.
It's the tone machine. It's the monster.
It just has the tone. I have a Gallion Kruger, and that's a 400 RB3 head. I use that as my preamp. It does have a DI out. If I do feel like I want to mix the DI with the cabinet, I have a 4x10 Ampeg cabinet, which I usually mic with a distance mic. I'll just use a condenser, and then I'll put a 57 a little bit out from one of the cones of the speakers, and that's the bass setup. But most of the time, I'm just going straight into just a direct signal.
Mm-hmm. Sounds good. Simple and powerful. A few tools that work, are versatile, and get the job done. So we've got a little more complexity available as we move over to the guitar, section.
Yeah.
Number of instruments here and elsewhere, plus the the pedal board and the different amps. So we've got, does it start to look like option paralysis? It might look like places that convey that, but I think you're going to show us how this actually works to just, again, it's not an overly overloaded palette. It connects right to what you're trying to accomplish.
Yeah, obviously I have a lot of guitars, but there's really only about 4 real different tones in these guitars, as far as the DNA. There's obviously the Strat sound, the Tele sound, the single cut 2 humbucker sound, and then I have a couple character pieces. I've got a Jazz Master, I've got that Frankenstrat over there that's got lots of different tonal options in it. I got the Guild, for kind of an SG feel, and then I've got my 12-string electric.
Yes.
So it's a palette, but it's not a crazy palette, and there are specific, I have sentimental attachment, plus there are tonal differences between the instruments because of the various mods they all have, either apparent or under the hood with the electronics. Each of these guitars will eventually have their own standalone video if they don't already, so we won't go into the detail on that. But as far as the amplifier and the pedal board setup,
real quick before we get to that, you mentioned emotional attachment. This is just me putting in a plug for keep your original guitars. If you've either your first guitar or one you formed an attachment to and is connected to significant things, hang on to that.
That black Strat we got in San Francisco in 1993.
Yes, that very eventful visit that connected to things, a lot of things we still have. So
yeah, and I could point at any of these and I can tell you the year that I got them, but I have, and out in the shop right now, though, I have my very first electric guitar and my very first Strat.
Yes.
Are both still sitting out there.
Yeah, so anyway, plug over. So we've got the instruments themselves, and now we're going into the signal chain. Right
now, I have 5 electric guitar amps, but I narrowed it down to these 2 to be the studio workhorses. I have a video, and I'll put links to all these things in the description about this high watt amp I recently got. It has turned out to be one of the best things I've ever bought, gear-wise, period. It has a wonderful clean tone, which makes it a pedal platform, which is where those pedals come in. I'll talk about the pedal board after I get done with the amps here. And then it's got on its kind of like turbo. On the dirty channel, it has like a regular dirty and then kind of a turbo dirty. I leave it on turbo dirty because it does a DS1. It just sounds like a DS1. So that foot switch up there at the top of the pedal board is a reverb, and then basically I consider it a DS1 switch. So having that built into the amp has been huge, and then I use my pedals for the rest of the coloration and tones that I need on the clean channel. I am not an anti-tube amp person as much as I love to plug solid state. I do love solid state. I love tube too. I sold one of the Pro Juniors from the Pro Junior video, but I kept my heavily modded one that I use, when I want that sound, So really I have I have 1 tube amp and I have 1 solid state amp. Solid state amp has 2 channels. 1 channel is just dedicated to basically recreating a DS1. So and I do not touch the knobs on that. I have spent a lot of time with that amp to dial in the tones, and it stays as it is. It plays nicely with all of my pedals. My pedal board is not that intimidating. I have a volume pedal to a tuner to a compressor. That orange pedal with the green knobs is a bass cut on the right side and a clean 40 dB boost on the left side. It's a pedal I built and designed. So what that pedal does is if I'm playing a Les Paul and I'm on the rhythm pickup and it's a little too muddy, I can use the bass cut function. And then if I want to drive that Electra pedal that's next to it, that's another one of my builds. That's a soft clipping Electra, which you'll never hear of because that's another one that I kind of came up with myself. That is my low gain distortion circuit, would be those 2 pedals playing together. My TubeWorks real tube overdrive pedal, the 901, that is my primary dirt pedal. It is, and that's it. That's my entire drive section is a boost with a bass cut into an Electra, into a TubeWorks, into the clean channel of that amp. So I have 3 stages of distortion, and that's it. And I can mix and match those. I can put the boost into the TubeWorks, or I can, use the Electra to boost the TubeWorks. Then my coloration pedals, which are just a cheap Univibe ripoff, a chorus, a flanger, a phaser, an analog delay, and then I've got a tape echo. and that is it. That does, and I don't consider that to be like a crazy amount of effects, considering that is going to be all of my palette for recording.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So that's it.
And I was thinking in terms of palette as you're describing it. This is a palette. I see the artist palette with the different colors that are understood, how they're used in combination and so forth. This is different than the rabbit hole approach, which is going to the art supply store and wondering if your yellow is the right yellow as opposed to the 50 other brands of yellow on the wall that you can buy tubes of. This is, I've got my yellow. I've got my red, I've got my orange. I've worked with them enough to know how they go together, to know what I can make with them. And that allows you to have this kind of simplicity in place.
Well, I made choices. I've used a Boss phaser forever. Boss choruses, why would you ever need a different chorus than that? I'm a flange junkie. So the Digitech option there, even though it's not analog, it's a digital pedal. I've got 7 different flavors of flanger in that. So while it does appear on the surface, this does look, fairly manageable, but I do have a lot of options, maybe almost too many. And that is a super phaser. So I've got, mode 1 and mode 2. I don't feel like I'm limited by this.
Mm-hmm.
I feel like that's perfect.
Yes.
And I don't really change my settings. I turn them on and off.
Yeah, knowing these pieces and knowing what you want to do with them simplifies things. You don't spend 3 hours in the studio clicking through each mode and figuring out the nuances every time you record.
No, if I want a phaser, I hit a phaser pedal.
You.
Yeah, I hit the phaser pedal. To mic, I will take the amps and I'll put them in the live room and just run, a mic cable, 2 mic cables out there if I want a double mic, but most of the time it's just an SM57, dead on cone between 8 to 12 inches out. And I listen to it and I move the mic back and forth until I find it. I don't do side cone and I don't kiss the grill anymore. I do it from a distance. It's just the, I have a video on that too about Albini, but that's just, he's right. That's a great way to capture me.
Yeah. And another acknowledgement of, don't start from a prefab notion of what you're supposed to do. Look at your space, look at your elements, look at what you're trying to achieve. And you're not miking an amp on stage in the middle of a live concert in an arena. You're trying to get this sound in this space. So you're starting from that point of view. So anything else you want to talk about with your guitar setup, or are you ready to talk about?
I'll swing over here, and you can swing back there because you can probably cover the drum kit and acoustic guitars just from one spot there. Well, I'll just jump into the drum kit. I mean, it's pretty basic. I've got a kick, I got a snare, and I use 2 floor toms as my toms. I'm not a high tom person. I have already discussed this on the channel about how I do a hybrid setup a lot of the time where I'm basically recording a drum track, which I consider using hydrogen, which I consider a sophisticated click track, where I'll have kick and I'll have snare and I'll have hi-hat and maybe I'll add other coloration. Where this kit usually comes in now is that what I'll do is I'll mic it up and I'll add the fills and I'll add the cymbals in. And it's a very, drums are probably my 3rd most proficient instrument after guitar and bass. It's a very basic setup. I described the shells, and then I've just got a ride, and I've got a crash, and then a character cymbal, and then my hi-hat. I keep it pretty basic. I have a feeling on a few of the songs on the next couple projects that I have 2 albums worth of material. I think that there's going to be one album that's going to lean a little bit more into me actually playing full kit. My last album, Landed, was all full kit. There was no drum machine on that whatsoever. There was drum machine on some things prior. I think the first release will be heavy drum machine, and then the second release will probably be more back on the kit. I just don't have time to practice. If I had all the time in the world, I would be doing live drums always. But
so what do you do from a miking standpoint on the drums?
I do a 4 mic setup. What I do is I have right here, I have my SM57, and then I've got my AKG kick drum mic that would go, get buried into the kick drum. And then I use 2 Rode NT5s as my stereo pair above. I run them in an X pattern, and that's it. 4 mics, nothing else. I don't mic the toms. I don't mic underneath. I don't do any of that stuff. The overheads seem to pick up a very nice picture of the drum kit, and you could almost get away with just overheads on a drum kit, to be honest. Or you could do a 1 mic setup. I could put my MT1 out there and probably get a good picture of the kit. I like to have in the mix down the ability to mess with the snare and the kick. I like to add echo to them sometimes, depending on the track, and I like to be able to EQ them. I'll spend more time EQing a snare or a kick drum than I will a vocal, usually. Because my voice, I can't fix that much, but I can fix the drums.
Yeah, and that's so foundational. Just like the foundation of a structure. If that's ambiguous, if that's muddy and fuzzy, and not tightened up as just the way it needs to be on the track, then it creates variables and chaos all the way up.
If your snare sounds like shit, you can't fix it. The track's done. It's toast. Somebody should have told that to Metallica. But anyway, but once again, the philosophy that it sounds good in the room. Again, I tune and I go through this kit before I record with it every single time, and I check every lug, and I play it extensively to make sure there's no squeaks and there's no rattles. I have put super glue on every single connection inside of the shells if it needs it. I go kind of nuts, but I just want to hear me hitting things and no mechanical noise. Because the worst thing in the world is you get done nailing a perfect drum track and then there's a squeak. And even if nobody else can hear it in the mix, I can't. And it ruins the song for me, so I can't have that. But yeah, that's the drums. I mean, there's not much to it. I once again, I don't want to overcomplicate things. I leave it set up. I leave it tuned. In a perfect world, I should be able to throw up the mics right now and just be able to do a drum track. It should be, I try to keep everything just 100% ready to go.
Yeah, it does seem that with acoustic instruments, drums, or what we're about to get into with guitars and vocals, it can really be overthought, considering all the potential hypothetical acoustic issues that you would have to contend with can snowball and create a domino effect. But even with the complexity of advanced prep that you're talking about, it's conceptually simple in another way. It's just like, this is a mechanical object. It needs to perform this function. You optimize it for that function. If something's inefficient, if something's not sturdy, if something's loose or making noises, you tidy that up. And then you create an efficient way to pull those sounds into the system instead of thinking about how to create a hyper overthought dedicated space for this one thing. You're applying that same principle as elsewhere to this tool.
And with proper mic technique, I've had some people go, "Oh, don't those acoustic guitars resonate and come into it?" If you can pick up that overtone, but I've never had a sound come through the mics when I'm playing drums from any of the resonant instruments on the walls that negatively affected the track. If nothing else, I treat it as part of the room sound. If there is a little bit of woo, there may be some low end woo coming out of the acoustic guitars as they're, breathing out those frequencies that are hitting them. But it's great for the acoustic guitars because basically I'm seasoning them because I'm playing drums right next to them. Yeah. Some people think that's nuts. For a while I was trying to, I would put, either capos or I put foam underneath the strings to try to keep them from resonating. Then I was listening back to tracks. I'm like, I can't hear them anyway. And then I tried it without them and I'm like, oh, it's fine.
Yeah. Acoustic hypotheticals can just be an incredible waste of time. If it sounds good, it is good. It's a truism. And if you listen carefully and you know what you're trying to accomplish and it holds up through the course of a mix, then it works.
Yeah, and for me, it was, as I learned the room, it was more just proof in the pudding. It's like, okay, well, I listened to this and it sounds fine.
Yeah.
And since we're here, I do have a wall of acoustic guitars. It's the funny thing is I spend most of my time playing electric, but on the projects coming up, I think it's going to cut pretty close to 50%, of the guitar tracks that are going to be heard are going to be acoustic because I'm really going for clarity. and there are a lot of arpeggiated parts, and there are a number of finger-picked parts. I just don't do that kind of stuff on an electric guitar. That's not what it's for in my mind. If I want clarity, if I want the purity of just the note, I will go acoustic every time. I think that's a difference between me and a number of other people who are out talking about these things, is that I've spent as much time on acoustic guitars as I have electric guitars. I prefer electric guitar at the moment. Like I just enjoy playing them. They're more fun for me at the moment. But I've also spent many years where I didn't touch electric guitars much, and I made mainly some years with you, some years on my own. I've done a lot. I've done as many shows with me and an acoustic guitar as I have with an electric guitar.
Yeah.
So
you spent the time to connect to music and notes and chords as the currency of expression, instead of there's many other ways to do it at this point. But without going into detail about what is on this, too much detail about what's on this wall. What's the palette? What's the
let's move the camera a little bit so we're getting a better look at it.
You kind of talked about the sonic palette of the electric guitars. What does this range of acoustics give you?
Okay, well, looking at the wall, let's see here. I'm going to move it a little bit further. I might be out of camera for a second here, guys. Okay, well, starting, we've got a spruce top parlor, a cedar top parlor, mahogany tops, LGO or double-aught size guitar. We have a ratty vintage Stella, of course, which has its own thing, a 12-string, a spruce dreadnought, vintage Gibson LGO. So we've got a vintage mahogany top and a boutique, because that Milet right there is a boutique guitar. I mean, I had that custom built for me.
You've got some videos on.
It'll be coming. And some of these guitars have been detailed. My Takamine, then going to which is a vintage. That's a vintage spruce. Then we've got a vintage cedar, or not vintage cedar, but a cedar top classical. And then we've got my Gibson classical back there, which is not necessarily a rare bird. It's kind of considered a student instrument, but I have all my bases covered. I used to have the D17, which would have been my mahogany top dreadnought, but that guitar served no use for me. So I got rid of it and got other things. But there's kind of no acoustic sound I can't get out of the 3 nylons and then all these steel strings. I mean, I've got a dreadnought, and I've got small bodies, and I've got a 12 string, and I've got nylon strings, and that's really, what else do you need?
Yeah. What's your approach to recording them then?
Super simple. It took me forever to figure out how to record an acoustic guitar, and it didn't really change until I got the MT5s. I use a stereo bar where I mount the 2 MT5s on it, and I'll put it, I would even just set up, let's see here, let me swing around here. So the way I record an acoustic guitar would be, I'd set up the MT5s right here. I get myself this foam block, have my leg in the proper playing position, and then I have one pointed at the middle of the neck, and I have one pointed not into the sound hole, but right about where the fretboard meets the body. So I have one on the neck, one there. I keep about 12 inches away, and that's it. And it gives me a great picture of the guitar. I've tried, every possible way of miking an acoustic guitar. And what I found is just having a stereo pair that's matched of good condenser mics, one here, one there. You don't even have to, I'm obviously moving when I'm playing. It's not like I'm magnetically held to those mic positions. And as long as you're just getting a general picture of what's happening in this area, you're good, in my opinion. The worst thing that you can do is just have too much signal. Or not enough. Because if you don't have enough signal, then when you do the makeup, it gets loud. But that's how I record acoustics. And then and real quick, just to kind of jump the gun, for vocals, I do vocals in this room all the time, where I just take my NT1 and I set it up and I just do a vocal. it's a lot easier because I'm just right here and I can go like that. If I have enough lead in on a track and if I feel like I want that live room sound, I'll once again drag my butt out there and then run back and forth. I prefer not to do that, but I do it sometimes. I have recorded acoustic guitars in there in the live room, and I don't see an appreciable difference between what happens here and what happens there. More and more, I just work really just seriously. I sing a foot away from the drum kit.
Yeah.
I'm recording drums a foot away from acoustic guitars. It's all happening in here. And I do have, the ceiling's deadened and I have some soundproofing. This room's probably 70% dead. It doesn't have a whole lot of resonance, so I do have to, add reverb if I really want a strong reverb flavor. But, that's really it. I don't get crazy with it.
Yeah, and from a Studio 101 standpoint, there are a lot of things here that people might reflexively say that doesn't make sense.
It can't work.
It can't work.
It can't work. What you're doing is insane.
Yeah, but it all ties back to a common, simple principle where you're not talking about how you compensate for things. You're not talking about how you get around things. You're talking about, this is my palette of sounds. I have this nylon string guitar. I have this, Les Paul style guitar. I have this drum kit. It makes these sounds. How do I carry these sounds into the system? Your system is not set up to avoid the reality of your sound and the sources of the sounds. It's designed to get out of the way of the sources of the sounds. And so you've got a guitar, you want that sound into the system. And so it can be this simple once you go through that thought process with what you're putting into. It can be done the other way, where you don't have a guitar that has the sound that you want. You capture it, and then it becomes very complicated.
Oh yeah, trying to make things sound like what they aren't.
Exactly.
Which is fine if that's what you want. Because some people do want like a heavily affected thing, or something that is not what it is, and I get that. I mean, if that's an aesthetic choice, there's a difference between aesthetic choice and then, going crazy trying to sound like you're playing through a Dumble or something. You know what I mean? I'm not pretending that. I play through budget to low end pro gear for the most part, and I just work my butt off to try to get a clean signal chain with the best possible sounds coming out of my fingers and out of the speakers and out of the sound holes of these, and that's really just it. Like I said, when I first started in this space, I didn't think it was going to work out, and it has worked out. A lot of things, like you said, a lot of things that I thought, oh, that's why I'm getting that. I had the snare on. You turn the snare off, all of a sudden this kit becomes pretty dead quiet, a little bit from the toms. But anyway, that aside, I didn't know if it was going to work, but then I've recorded 2 full projects in here, and they've turned out very well, and every bit as good as what I was doing, if not better, because I've just learned more as I've gone along in the simplification process. And I guess, maybe the takeaway from all of this, as I turn and actually focus on you, the watcher, if you have made it this far, is that a lot of times there are limitations, but your limitations can be overcome by imagination, or just quite simply saying, well, you know what, that can't matter because I can't change it. If I want to record drums, I'm not going to store these and then get them out every time I need a drum kit and set them up because, oh, geez, they might resonate a little bit. And maybe a mic's going to catch it, somewhere. I can't worry about that. I just can't. So there's some things you just take off the table, and it simplifies your world, and you just accept the sounds that you have and make them better and make your performances better and just try to remain inspired. Of course, I upgrade when I can, and of course, I try to streamline when I can. And if I can find a better mic solution, I will get one. Right now, I'm playing around with, well, maybe I should get a ribbon mic and mess around with one of those, because I realize I don't have one, and maybe that would work well in this space. I don't know because I haven't tried it yet. So, any final thoughts, Kevin, before I sign off here?
Well, I think you kind of framed it well. This isn't this isn't a how you should do it video. This is a video demonstrating the execution of a particular artistic philosophy. This is the principle of DIY. It's yourself. It's starting from where you are, what you have, and what you want to accomplish. And everything that Trish just went through is an example of how he put his principles into action, and it's a reflection of his particular work ethic, his particular artistic goals, how he likes to interact with his tools and so forth. And if there's a how to do it, that's it. It's, identify those things, establish those things, and then figure out what you can do to make that work.
Yeah, I mean, it's basically the old saying, there's not really a wrong way. I mean, there are wrong results you can get, and there are things that you can do just blatantly that would, just sound like crap. But you'd be surprised at how much you can do with what you probably already have. And I guess that would be my main message for this. But anyway, if you made it through this long, excruciating, rambling video, I would appreciate a subscribe and a like. Share comments, anything about a particular space that you're working in, that the challenges that it's presented, the rewards you've gained by just putting a little bit of work into it, maybe accepting limitations and then finding workarounds. And, you can't have it all. That's kind of what it all comes down to. And I hope that this video inspires others to do the same as I have. Make the best of your space, make the best of your gear, and remember that it's always about the sounds you're producing and being inspired.
And check the links below for a few of the examples of what Tris talked about. And if you've got any particular tools that have solved problems for you and helped make your own DIY setup the best it can be, share them below. Let's share some best practices here for how you've solved your problems.
That's great advice from Kevin, as always, and we will see you next time with more content. You take care.